Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on working with and managing young people. First of all, some introductions. We have myself, Sue Watson, who's the HR Operations Manager, and we have Victoria, who's going to be our main presenter today, our HR Knowledge Manager, and talking you through all the whys and wherefores of managing young people. We also have a team working with us in the background who'll be fielding your technical questions just in case you have any challenges or if you have any requests. We will send out copies of the presentation to you all afterwards, and you will get a link to a recording of the webinar. Today, we're going to be covering all about the employment life cycle of a young person and all the added responsibilities that you have, including their recruitment, their health and safety, their learning and development while they're with you, and all the employee relations issues that go alongside that. We do encourage you to ask questions as we go through. The way you do this, we have muted you because there's so many people on the webinar today that it would be quite challenging if we left you all as a free-for-all. But we do want to hear your questions, so you should have a chat panel which looks something like this. Submit your question to us as we go through, and then we will field them at the end. So I'll ask Victoria the questions for you at the end of the presentation. We are also going to ask one or two polls to help it along, to hopefully you'll feel part of the presentation, so you'll be asked to submit your answers. In order to be able to do this, do make sure that your screen is not in full screen mode when we come to the poll. You will know when we've come to a poll because the screen will look something like this. And for some reason only known to go to webinar, it doesn't work in full screen mode, it won't let you vote. So if you would like to participate, just make sure you have reduced your screen slightly. So I'm going to hand over to Victoria, who will take you through the webinar today.
Thank you, Sue. So I'll just get my screen set up. Thank you. So you can all see. Brilliant. So thank you for joining us today to explore the topic of working with young people. With the Kickstart scheme and the apprenticeships that are already in existence, we wanted to take this opportunity to help you understand more about managing young people. So first of all, we will discuss the employment of young people and who do we mean by this term, and then we're going to look at the employee life cycle that Sue outlined, such as the recruitment of young people, health and safety, learning and development, and employee relations. So with the recent introduction of the Kickstart scheme and investment from the government to help young people get into work, we're likely going to see an increase in the hiring of young people. And for some employers, the Kickstart scheme or apprenticeship schemes may be the start of a long-term career offering for that young person. So it can be a fantastic opportunity to bring young people into the business where you can then build and shape that young person into the employee that you need. And you can also ensure that their learning is tailored to your business. But at the heart of the employment offering, though, employers must be mindful that for young people, they will have either little or no work experience. And because of the lack in experience and skill, we must remember that not only will they need training in the job that they are going to undertake, but also training in how generally business operates. So they will need to understand how to behave in a working environment, learn to develop good work ethics and attitude towards work, and gain an understanding of what professionalism looks like. Now, there are strict rules that apply to the employment of young people, so we will therefore look into this as we progress through the webinar and look at where special considerations need to be made throughout the employment life cycle. So a young person, as defined in law, is somebody over the compulsory school age but is under 18. But for the purpose of today, we are going to look at young people who are under 18, but also those to the age of 25 who could also be eligible for the schemes such as the Kickstart or apprenticeship scheme. And throughout this webinar, I'm going to highlight information that relates specific to the legal definition of those under 18, so you can be sure and clear on the extent of the legal responsibilities for you. So I mentioned that there are strict rules that apply to the employment of young people. Not only are their legal obligations for employers, but there will be a need to adapt working practices, as well as having greater tolerance in the way in which they are managed in the workplace. We're going to look at some of the key areas of the employment life cycle and look to see where those special considerations need to be made. As you'll see from this illustration, the main areas of focus will be the recruitment, learning and development, health and safety, and employee relations. But before we get stuck in, we just want to run a few polls just so we can understand the context and what it's like from your perspective in terms of the situation with employing young people. So I'm going to just hand over to Sue to start running the polls for us.
Thank you, Victoria. So the first one that we're going to load up is, do you currently employ young people? And for clarity, for this purpose, we are looking at those who are under 25. I've just loaded the poll. Nearly everybody's voted, just a few more seconds. Okay, I'll close that poll now. And I'll share the results with you. So there we go. We've got 76% of you said yes, you do employ young people under 25 years old.
Okay, yeah, that's
Okay.
a high percentage.
It is a high percentage, yeah. So I'm just going to hide that one and load the next one, which is, do you think you will take young people on over the coming weeks and months? I'm just going to launch that one. I think nearly everybody's voted on that one, so I'm going to close that poll and share that with you.
Okay, yeah,
There we go.
that's brilliant.
Another high percentage, 77 are going to take more on. So this is what the government are hoping for, isn't it? It's what they're looking for. Okay, and if I hide that one, and I think it's one final one in this section. And I'll launch that one. So that's, do you think you will employ young people as part of the Kickstart scheme? Everybody's voted now. So I'll close that one and share those results. They're slightly different, but 59% of you do think you will take advantage of the Kickstart scheme. We're still coming to terms with all of the ins and outs of that one, so that's interesting, bearing in mind a lot of you will be SMEs, and so will need some kind of representative unless you're going to recruit.
Yeah. I think it's the administration side of the scheme, I think, that's thrown it for a lot of people, and just working out in your head as to how you can go about participating in it, because like you say, you need a representative if you haven't got the required numbers to apply, which we can talk about more in this webinar. But yeah, that's interesting, but definitely positive that there's going to be some recruitment moving forward of young people.
Absolutely. Right, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to focus on recruitment and the considerations that we must take when employing young people. I guess the first thing is around being mindful that the young people, of course, have little or no work experience for you to rely on assessing. So obviously that makes things a little bit tricky compared to a normal recruitment process. We would say that base your assessment methods around behaviours. So because you can inquire and explore behaviours they've demonstrated at school, university, any volunteering work, you know, those behaviours that are replicated throughout. So whether it's planning and organising in the school environment, university, teamwork, they're all relevant skills. So we would suggest basing those around behaviours. Consider the use of assessment centres, especially with the Kickstart scheme, as you'll have most likely several applicants to put forward and consider for the one placement. Assessment centres are useful in the recruitment of young people, as it will obviously allow you to assess multiple people at the same time. The assessment centre can test young people for values and qualities and behaviours, but do use with caution any assessment of technical skills, because, as I say, they do have that lack of experience or knowledge of work and perhaps your industry. In terms of interviewing process, then the good old competency-based interview always stands up strong, and we would recommend that for the recruitment of young people because it focuses, as I say, on behaviours, and given that they do have that lack of experience and knowledge, then it's trying to home in on the behaviours, what they've demonstrated, to give you an indication as to how they can work in your working environment. Behaviours, as I say, are transferable, so how they've participated in team activities at school can give you an idea as to how they work with teams in your workplace. You know, we're asking how they organised and managed completing a dissertation can give you insight into not only working to schedules and their planning and organisation abilities, but also how they deal with pressure. And the thing with competency-based interviews, the reason why they're good is because it's all about how somebody's behaved in the past is actually a really good prediction to future behaviour. And in terms of the interview process as well, I would say if you already have established question sets in place in your business, then take these and simplify them. So as I say, working under pressure does not only relate to employment, but very much relates to participating in exams, university assignments. You know, they are all transferable skills. So adapt your existing question set to make it relevant to the school, university environment. And also, excuse me, explore whether they've undertaken volunteer work or they've participated in clubs, sporting activities, because all of those actually demonstrate and show their ability to collaborate, work as team members and working together, which are all very good skills to carry on into the working of employing young people. The working environment, there has to be a number of considerations that you give towards that. You know, so bear in mind that they may never have used a printer and equipment such as that. It might seem a bit silly or unbelievable, but actually the reality, you know, some children may not have had that access, that opportunity to use some of the systems that are in place. And they may not be aware of the need to keep working areas clear, or they may not even know about evacuation procedures that go on in a workplace. So there's all those sort of practical considerations that should be given to the working environment. And then you've got the training. So, you know, as I say, they've perhaps had little experience of using computers, printers or scanners. So it's about how you training on the safe use of those pieces of equipment, how you provide training on your evacuation procedures, just as you would with all your employees. But bear in mind, they would never have gone through any of those, perhaps, or not many occasions of doing that. And make sure that you provide the relevant training on your health and safety rules that apply to their, not just their working environment, but to the job that they do. I would say mental well-being is actually an important part to consider as well from duty care and health and safety. Remember that they will have little or no work experience and certainly little life experience. And obviously with life experience, you become more resilient to things, you become stronger and being able to adapt and respond to change. And so somebody that's of little experience and just out of university or school, you know, their ability to cope with major events may be different to somebody else's ability to cope that's been in employment for some time. So if you offer employee assistance programs, ensure you tell them about this, or even consider assigning them a workplace buddy or mentor, because they've got that go-to person that can help, they can offload to, and they can just talk about and ask help at any point. Although obviously that should not take away from the relationship they need to have with their own line manager. You then have safeguarding of young workers, the working time regulations, risk assessments, all of which we're just going to now have a look at in more detail. So safeguarding young workers is fundamental, and that is those up to the age of 18. It's about having processes for protecting vulnerable people from crime or other forms of abuse. So those under the age of 18 will be classed as vulnerable people. Those responsible for young workers have a duty of care to look after them, and it's going to be absolutely essential that you implement and maintain effective safeguarding procedures when employing especially under the those under the age of 18s. So some practical things to consider. Then there's the important safer recruitment. So that could be the DBS checks, or the DBS checks that must be carried out for all employees who have day-to-day responsibility for young workers under 18. Then there's a requirement to have safeguarding training for all those that are involved in the employment of that young person, and of course the risk assessments. So it's about carrying out an audit and to risk assess so that you can understand the risks that are posed through the young person's interaction with the company, employees, or representatives of your organisation. Now, in terms of risk assessments, these should be completed before the employment starts, and it should be of the work hazard specifically in relation to the individual. We know from research that those between the ages of 18 and 24 are 50% more likely to be injured in the workplace than more experienced workers. The Health and Safety website does have a lot of useful information on employing young workers, and you can subscribe to free emails from them. And in terms of considerations, then when you do your risk assessment, then make sure that it considers the health and safety training that needs to be given, the nature and layout of the working area, and the types of equipment, methods of use and work activities to be undertaken. Now, working time regulations are very strict for young workers, i.e. those under the age of 18. So I've set out here in the table a good summary, and as Sue said at the beginning, you will get a copy of these slides after the presentation, after the webinar. So there are some strict restrictions. So let's take night working. So generally 16 to 17-year-olds are not allowed to work between 10 o'clock at night and 7 in the morning. But there are some exceptions, as you can see from the table, which I've just noted here. So there are some sectors such as catering, agricultural, hotel, where a young worker could work between 10 p.m. and 12 or between 4 and 6, but where there are no adult workers available, and that their training isn't adversely affected by doing it, but also that they are also allowed the equivalent period of compensatory rest. So there are some exceptions to that rule around night working, so it's very much on dependent on your sector. You then have limits in terms of your daily working hours. Now, where somebody over the age of 18 can opt out of this, young workers, those up to the age of 18, cannot. So they're entitled to or allowed to work 8 hours max. Their rest breaks, daily rest breaks, should be 30 minutes if working longer than a 4.5-hour day. and a daily rest period of 12 hours in each 24-hour period worked, with a weekly rest period of 48 hours in each 7-day period. And they have a maximum weekly working time of 40 hours. And again, that is the working hours cannot be averaged out over the 17-week period that we have for those over the 18, and they obviously they aren't entitled or allowed to opt out of the maximum working hours. So there are some tight restrictions there, and that's all to do with their health and safety. So we're now going to sort of look at the learning and development aspect of employing young workers. If you take on a young person under the new Government Kickstart Scheme, which we had some details out last week about it, we now know that there will be certain detail about how you propose to develop that young person. So the Kickstart is very targeted at employing young people, but with a purpose. So it has to be linked to training them, developing them, because it's about kickstarting their career. So if you are going to employ under the Kickstart scheme, then when you apply, then you will need to show on there how you're going to develop their skills and experience. You'll need to set out how you will help them to search for long-term employment opportunities. You'll also need to show how you can guide them on setting career goals and provide career advice to them, and how you're going to provide guidance on writing a CV, helping them to prepare for interviews. But alongside that, there's also the need to develop them in their practical skills at work. So as I said at the start, early on in the webinar, you know, they're coming with little or no work experience. So the whole concept of work and what a working environment looks like, the culture, you know, will be completely new to a lot of them. So it's about how you then develop the practical skills such as team working, communication, timekeeping, good attendance. So all of this information is what the application process will ask you to set out. Setting aside the Kickstart scheme, regardless of that, when you do employ young people, then the induction is going to be key to the overall success of their onboarding and learning from day one, and ultimately will lead to their effective performance. So when it comes to an induction program, make sure you have a very clear set out induction plan that looks at including the geography of where the building and where everything is, a plan that covers off how they're going to learn how to use basic equipment, you know, and bear in mind that they're likely to have basic IT skills and perhaps have limited knowledge and use of certain applications. You then want to incorporate into your induction about, you know, your organisation structure. What does it look like? So the inclusion of structure charts, so and an understanding of who does what, and then procedures. So make sure you're covering off your health and safety procedures, any expense procedures you have in place, invoicing, and confidentiality. Then it's also worth having some introduction into the company history and the values that you have in place, because it's all about developing their understanding of how they behave in a working environment. And then, of course, any job-specific training that you need to include and set out the standards and expectations moving forward. So that's around behaviours, the absence reporting, you know, in general good attendance. In terms of a probation period, be mindful that their progress in the role may be at a different rate to someone who has previous experience of work. So I guess it's about demonstrating and having greater tolerance to young people because of this lack of skill and experience. So it's just being more mindful of that when you're looking at understanding how they're getting on in that probation period. And employee relations is all about the working environment. So, for example, how you manage behaviours, how you manage the attendance at work, how you manage pay, and of course, performance in the role. And if we first of all look at pay, then in regards to young people and everybody, there's a legal obligation to abide by the national minimum wage. And the rate of pay does depend on the age and if the young person is an apprentice or not. You'll probably all be familiar that the national minimum wage does change each year in April. And just for clarity, this is sort of the current rate. So where you employ apprentices, then if they're aged under 19, or if they're 19 plus but in their first year of apprenticeship, then their hourly rate is £4.15. For non-apprentices under the age of 18, then it's £4.55, 18 to 20 is £6.45, and 21 to 24 is £8.20, with it then going up to £8.72 for everybody over the age of 25. Now, with the announcement of the Kickstart scheme, it's been confirmed that employers must adhere to the national minimum wage if they place an employee under the scheme. However, employers can top up if they wish. In terms of behaviours and standards, then, as I said a moment ago, set out during the induction process what the expected standards of behaviour are. In terms of feedback, performance, ensure that you give that timely feedback where you see minor issues, because it's about nipping in the bud. And remember that they may not realise that they're acting outside of what you're expecting or how they should in the workplace, because they're not going to be used to a working environment. They're going to be learning day to day, and you know, they are very much going to be observing how everybody else behaves. So another point I would say is remember that leading by example is always very important. So you'll find that through their learning, by observing others in the workplace, they are picking up how people act and behave in a variety of situations. So just, I guess, exercise a little bit more tolerance if they're doing some minor things that perhaps they may not realise they shouldn't be doing. In regards to performance, then be realistic in your expectations. Remember their lack of skill and experience. Where underperformance is seen, be sure to examine the training needs just to see if additional training is required. And as I said, it is also important to exercise greater tolerance because they're coming into a whole new way of living, and it's you know, it could be a shock to some people. So just exercise that tolerance and be mindful of the fact that they're learning each day. Well, I'm going to hand over to Sue because we're going to carry out a number of polls before. I think we're going to look at some questions as well. So over to you, Sue, for launching the polls, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got one poll left, slightly different question this time. I'm going to launch it for you. So it is, what do you think would be your biggest challenge in employing young people? Is it managing their health and safety, their development, their performance, or their recruitment? So it could be all of those, but which one do you think would be your biggest challenge? I think everybody's just about voted then, so I'll close that one and share the results with you. So the biggest challenge is managing the development, which is, we've been talking a bit recently about the Kickstart scheme in particular, because that has some specific requirements for managing the development of the individual person on that scheme. And we've put together a package that we are fine-tuning at the moment in order to cover off some of those things specifically targeted at young people, because that was the one area our clients were telling us that they felt they would need some help with. So it's interesting that you're also finding that would be your biggest challenge, followed by the performance, which is always difficult because it's knowing where to draw the line and where you need to take some more serious action, isn't it? And health and safety and recruitment, also pose their challenges. I think that's probably as we would expect, but
I think with managing health and safety, organisations already have well-established processes and an infrastructure in place, don't they, to manage that. And I guess it's just more the mindfulness of the risks, different risks that may come about from younger people, but the processes to understand that is the same whether you know somebody's 17 or 37. So I think that probably doesn't surprise me. but yeah, it's the development, which is more the it's all through your discussion, and you're engaging with the employee, the individual, to understand what their gaps are and what you're trying to develop.
Yeah. Mm.
And it's obviously a big investment, isn't it? But ultimately it will hopefully lead to an effective, high-performing individual that's also given them that career work experience and developing their skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, interesting on that. I'm going to hide that and just move on to the questions. If you can move on one more slide,
Yeah,
that we will.
there we go.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions for you.
Okay,
One is asking if for a bit more information about the Kickstart scheme.
right.
Maybe just a quick
Okay.
overview of the key steps of it.
Yeah, okay, so we now have the detail that came out, I think, last Wednesday, but essentially it is about employers being funded by the government for the 25 hours of employing somebody through that scheme. I think the thing that threw everybody last week is this thing around, if you're going to apply, there's a minimum number of placements that you have to be applying for, and that minimum is 30. Now, for many organisations, small companies, they're not going to be wanting 30. So actually, it's brought about some challenges in a way about, well, how can we work with other similar employers and trade bodies to actually do an application so that we can get a placement. So it's brought that up, but effectively you can employ somebody through the Kickstart scheme. If you haven't got your 30 placements that you need, then it's about linking up with other organisations, and the scheme works very closely with the job centre, so it is aimed at people who are on universal credit, out of work, and the job centre will provide the applicants to the employer, who then are responsible for the selection process. So, if you're going to run an assessment centre, like I spoke at the start of the webinar, there are some rules around the placements must not replace the roles or jobs of permanent employees or contractors. It's not about replacing work, it's specifically additional roles for the purpose of developing and providing that upskilling opportunity to young people. And hopefully there could be a long-term career plan that comes out, opportunity that comes out from the 6-month placement. I think when we send out the slides after today's webinar, I'll make sure there's a link to a separate webinar that we've recently done on the scheme itself. So, but yeah, so I think 30 placements got thrown people.
Absolutely. We're talking to a number of membership bodies to see if we can help them launch a scheme on behalf of their members. So if you are affiliated to any membership bodies, then talk to them, encourage them to try and represent you, unless you're big enough to have 30 placements on your own, of course, which some will have, but that is quite a big number for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And also your local Chamber of Commerce and your local job centre may also be able to help in that regard. So I think that's what the government is encouraging to do, isn't it? To go out and talk to all these people and see if they will set up a scheme for you.
Be interesting.
Yeah. So one of the other questions we've had is an interesting one. It's how can one instill professionalism for young recruits?
Okay.
Interesting, that one. Yes, yeah, you were talking about setting an example, weren't you?
I think for me, it's about leading by example is by far, I guess, the biggest way in which you can influence how somebody else is behaving. So if you're demonstrating all the, the behaviours and values of the organisation, your approach to your work, they're going to be picking up an awful amount. It's hard to define, but I think leading by example is one way. And then I guess as part of an induction process, it's about explaining, so say for example if it's a customer facing role or interacting with clients, then it's about educating them on how showing them examples about how you have liaised with a client before. You know, they'll be able to probably observe some of your emails that you may have sent out to clients, or they might observe you in a meeting with a client. So I think there'll be an element of, I guess, shadowing. I think that brings in a lot of benefit, because people are seeing actually how it is done. But I think lead by example and seeing how people operate in the workplace, and when minor mishaps happen or minor sort of things crop up, then it's just having that conversation and just setting straight as to actually perhaps you shouldn't have said it in that way. Probably would have been best saying, you know, X, Y, Z. I guess they're my thoughts. If you've got anything to add, Sue, on that.
Yes, I think I'd totally agree with you. And also things like your documentation and your standards, that you might have company standards of work, and making sure that, you know, emails that go to external people and internal people are written to a high standard with spelling and grammar that's correct. That helps to instill in them, if you just gently pick them up on it initially, but give them some help, offer them support, some training if maybe that's not their strongest point. Particularly be mindful of where English isn't their first language, that you might need to give them some extra support in English in the workplace, for example, to help them sort of achieve the standards you need. It's all about support, I think, identifying where the challenges are for the young person, and then exploring with them how you can help them improve. And I think if you do that, then you're less likely to get the sort of legal challenges that it might lead to. Just keep an open mind and seek advice if you need to. Because it is difficult sometimes to know how to do it. So we have one final question. Is somebody's heard something about some changes to the apprentice scheme? Do we know what the situation is with that yet?
We heard back on the 8th of July that the Chancellor was going to be funding or providing more financial support to employers who recruit apprentices. We've not heard anything else. I kind of thought we'd hear it along with the Kickstart news, but when that came out last week, it didn't talk about apprenticeships. But back on the 8th of July, when they did hint, they indicated that the financial support for employers to hire apprentices would be £2,000 for each apprentice under the age of 25, and 1,500 for each apprentice 25 and over. So, but as I said, they've not given any more clarity. What we did hear last week with the Kickstart announcement is that they were going to be coming out with publishing or communicating further support that helps more long-term career support for young people, but not at this point, because ultimately Kickstart is a short-term intervention. It's 6-month placements. So they've hinted that there's something further coming out, and I suspect, although I can't be sure, but I suspect perhaps that longer term is more about this apprentice and using apprenticeships longer term. But yeah, all we know now is it's 2,000 for each person under 25 and 1,500 for those over 25. And also, obviously, the government do already, employers already get that £1,000, don't they, to take on apprenticeships. That doesn't change, and in fact, they hinted back on the 8th of July that these new figures will be on in addition to.
So it's as always, it's watching this space, isn't it? We keep checking every day. I mean, even with the Kickstart, we'd got this webinar booked, and it was 2 days before when they finally released the details that we were able to finish it off with. And we're expecting some changes. So we are trying to keep abreast of what's going on, and as soon as we know anything more, we will be letting you all know, and probably even running another webinar on the next steps. Sort of what's the follow-on from the Kickstart. So thank you for that, Victoria. Thank you very much. I think that ends questions. So I'll just and continue, just to say we are offering a discount on our fixed fee recruitment service as part of the Kickstart. We can help work with you in working with the job centre and helping you recruit these people. We can offer a lot more support around the Kickstart scheme. We're just putting together the packages now in terms of the documentation, such as the contracts and the supporting documentation you'll need, and also the training on the career management side in particular, as well as the softer skills. So we can help with all of that. We also have a health and safety division, so if you did need some advice or guidance or some risk assessments doing, then contact us and we can talk to you. We can put you in touch with Dom, our health and safety consultant, who will help you steer you in the right direction. He is doing a webinar this afternoon for us on COVID and the return to workplace, but he's also doing one on statutory compliance coming up as well in October. So, but he's around in between and can help you if that is of interest to you. If you think of any further questions about this or any related topic, then do feel free to contact us through our inquiries email or on our general number, and we'll try and help you as much as we can. As always, we welcome your feedback. If it's good or bad, we like to learn from these things. And if you have any suggestions for future webinars that you would like to see, then please do send your suggestions in and we will put them into our consideration pot for the next batch. We have got a series of webinars lined up. As I said, there's a health and safety at work one this afternoon. We've got one on the survivor syndrome and conflict resolution coming up next week. And then we have Brexit and another health and safety, the statutory compliance one in October, followed by right to work and the new points-based immigration system in November. There will be more added to that as we work through. As I said, we're waiting for developments from the government on any new schemes. But if there is something of particular interest to you, please let us know and we will see what we can come up with for you. And if you haven't already and you would like to keep abreast of what's going on, then our newsletters go out every month. Do sign up for them and we will send you all that information. Finally, all of our webinars are recorded and added to our webinars archive, which you can access through our main website or through our knowledge base if you are a subscriber to that service. It just remains for me to say thank you to you all for attending. Thank you to Victoria for conducting the webinar for us, and to a team for supporting in the background. Thank you all for attending and we look forward to meeting you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.